Right, so the shore has dried and so has my work, only in this case I can remove masking fluid. Using a clean finger, I carefully remove it from paper and my work looks different. The clouds start to shine. To be honest, I love this moment, and I'm always eager to remove masking fluid. The clouds now look like clouds. I'll also remove masking fluid from the shore so that we can see the work as a whole. On the one hand, grey masking fluid is great. We see where we had applied it. On the other hand, it doesn't let us see our work wholly. I mixed color for the boat. It should be a complex brown. There are many ways of mixing it. I don't like using ready-made browns from watercolor sets. I prefer to mix them myself. And for that I use maroon tones, orange and ultramarine. This way my boat acquires a pinkish tone and it will have a beautiful contrast against the green water. This brush seemed too big. Don't hesitate if you want to change brush while painting. It's very hard to paint whole work with one brush. It's possible though, but it's better to change tools according to different needs. I feel like making some parts of the boat edge lighter and some darker. This way we give it volume and defined shape. Our boat is sunk, so we'll have to use our imagination and think of what will be inside it. Here observation skill gives help. I've painted boats many times in my works, so I know that there are usually benches for sitting there. They should also comply with the perspective laws. So all this is painted in accordance with my previous drawing. They should seem parallel to each other, but in painting they won't be parallel. They'll meet in the vanishing point. Pay attention to it. I improvise here. If you're in doubt, then you better draw it in pencil first. I've marked the light parts of the benches. They'll be lit. We should always remember where the light comes from. In our case, here the light comes from the right and above. The part of the boat that's closer to us will be in shade. I add ultramarine to show shade inside the boat. I use the mix I had used previously: ultramarine, quinacridone, orange. We can add ochre. I think everyone will have their own mix. The important thing is that the boat should be dark in tone. As you can see, I add this mix to the same spot on my palette where I had previously mixed color for water. It's dark tones. It's usual practice when you use the same colors in your work, the mixes that you've already used, and they come in handy in other places. This way we create common color scheme, color consistency. I continue to show the shade. It's cold in color, looks kind of purple. Here we see clear border, contrast between light and shade. I mix a warm color and see what will happen next. A dangerous move. I want to unite it a bit. The contrast is too big between the benches and the shade, so I've mixed a neutral color using orange, ochre and quinacridone and united it while it hasn't dried. The pigment has slightly sunk in, but it's still quite flexible. So I've covered this spot with a unifying color and united it all a little. In this work, I'd like it if in the first place we looked not at the benches but at the beauty of water, and the boat would be perceived as a unified spot. I've also united things on the other side of the boat. Of course, everything blurred, so using a dry brush I make lighter the spots that I want to show. The sharp edge only appears in the central part of the bench, while the parts of the benches next to the boat sides are made foggy. So this is the painting we got. The boat has dried and we can continue. I'll mix a dark tone for the side of the boat, which is in the shade. I've added more paints grey, maroon, and I paint only after it's completely dry, so that the edge contrast between the lit part and the side of the boat is clear. Here we need to look at the silhouette very carefully. It's visible in the reference. We need to try and show this shape carefully. I want to add precision by using a calligraphy brush. The previous brush seemed too harsh to me. It requires more precision here. Try not to break the shape of the boat by this spot. The drawing may not be visible at this point, so pay attention here. And again, I try not to paint everything in one color here. The boat isn't flat. It has a curve, so some places will be lighter and some darker. I've added a little dark green to this mix, which has already been mixed on the palette. It's reflected light from water. It can be cobalt green, maybe horizon blue, with addition of yellow. This color is also opaque and deep. Try to make the color darker on the border with the boat and lighter and greener in tone closer to water. I do this all in one wash. I don't wait for the boat to dry. I continue this dark spot into the shade, into the reflection on water. This all is one spot. Here we have more phthalo green. This mix also contains white pigment. But it's not obligatory. Try to act fast before the boat dries, so that there are no lines, no clear border between transitions. Note how I've started to show the structure of water, reflections on water. My water turned out slightly different from the reference, and you will have also painted it differently, but here we follow our main rule. We see the reflections on water on its most prominent, lightest part. The lightest places is where we paint reflections. I usually use a calligraphy brush or a fine tip brush. When we worked with water on wet, it was important to use fine tip at the beginning and the end of a line. Here this rule also applies. The reflection has a thin beginning and end. Try to make this shape more complex. Leave light gaps somewhere. They're not just lines, they unite into an interesting spot structure. And of course we control the tone in relation to water. The reflection will be much darker. It will be contrasting. Separate individual strokes look beautiful next to this shape. The shape should be interesting, complex, not boring. It must be interesting to look at, and it shouldn't have a consistent pattern. It must be as lively as possible, and naturally, if you don't succeed at first, it's okay. You need to paint water many times before you can show the reflection confidently, even without a reference. It's a very pleasant process. It's important to adapt to it and learn. I move on, I continue the reflection. It goes in one piece. I try to show lines of interesting shape on the prominent parts of the wave only. To be honest, water painting is my favorite part. This way, water acquires a complete look. And becomes lively. The closer, the more this whole reflection breaks into separate small lines. And they aren't clearly parallel anymore. And they start to go along the shape of the wave in the foreground. In some places, I paint a slightly shivering line on purpose. They shouldn't look like they were painted with a ruler. It's the opposite. If your hand trembles on purpose, it will look even more interesting. It's important to adapt to it. Again, if you don't feel confident before this stage, you can practice on a separate piece of paper to make your hand accommodated to painting such lines. This way you'll feel confident. At this stage, it's important that you act boldly and quite fast, because the paint dries. We work on dry here, so the movement should be clear, confident, and elaborated. It's best to avoid correcting or blurring things. Here this area escaped my attention, but it asks to be painted. The reflections will also be here, but probably from the island. They are slightly different in tone, colder, because the island itself is in the background and it's colder. I barely touch the paper and paint thin lines. They are alive. They shouldn't be the same thickness. They should be darker and thicker in some places and thinner in others. I try to change the color in the foreground together with the color of water. They become more green, but at the same time they shouldn't become lighter in tone. It's the opposite. The objects in the foreground become darker. Remember, it's important to coincide with the lightest areas, and the shape of these light spots determines what you'll paint over them. Again, it's not the reference that determines it here, but the shape that appeared as a result of your first wash. I feel like blurring some places. Remember how in our first lesson we added things after our first wash, showing depth? Today we've done most of the job in one wash. And now by detailing the reflections, we give our work a complete look. Look where the light spots were left unattended and where you need to add reflection lines. I want to blur this. I think it's redundant. It's possible to do. I wipe it with a tissue to hide it. Watercolor allows corrections. It's important to know how to do them. I've dried my work. I removed the remaining masking fluid from the front part of the boat. Now its side is more illuminated. The contrast appears. I want to clarify the shape. And intensify it. Make the color darker because the front of the boat faces us, so this part is closer to us. According to the aerial perspective rules, we can make it darker and show that it's turned towards us in the space. I remove masking fluid from the rope that the boat is tied to. It's a small white line, but it creates accent, and it will sing if we show it correctly. I mix a complex brown color for the rope. I use orange, red, and addition of green. I've even added cool grey so that it's more opaque. I've mixed a light color next to the light so that there's no sharp contrast. We try to paint the rope with different colors too. Some places it's lighter and others darker, and because of this play of colors, it will look as if it's at a depth and it's lit differently. It will become thicker and darker in the foreground according to the perspective laws. I changed the color again. I added more ultramarine in shade, and now it becomes warm again. And goes somewhere beyond our sheet. I want to show the line that goes along the boat side. It's in the reference if we look closely. The boat looks quite schematic, and some detailing will help us clarify some things and add information about the boat. There's a rope from that side too. We haven't showed the rope that goes here. There's probably some fishing tackle at the back. You don't have to know what it is. You can just show a few spots, sticks, so that the boat hosts some life. Maybe the fisherman decided to take a swim and the boat is rocking on the waves. I've intensified color under the bench, just one line, showing the thickness of the board. Don't get carried away here. We want to keep this generalized look of the boat. Looks like this stick is odd. Consider your situation and composition. It shouldn't look like a fence of sticks. Our eye catches similar rhythms immediately. If it sees equal distances, it starts to count, think, and gets distracted from the main thing, which is contemplate the composition. I intensify the shade a bit. I've tried it and I'd like to add some accents with the white pigment. I mix a warm color consisting of white, a little orange, yellow to show the rope hanging from the boat. As I didn't cover it with masking fluid, I can show it now using gouache. It will look light against the dark shade. It will be an interesting accent in our work. We can even show the structure of this rope in the foreground, intertwining of the threads. It's not compulsory, but it will look interesting. A rigger brush handles such fine details beautifully. We can blur it even with our finger in some places. Everything can be useful in work. Don't be afraid to stain your hands. After all, we're artists. The rope became a bit lighter after drying. I added gouache modestly and mixing it with water, so it sank into the paper. I added some light accents again, show the structure of the rope, the light parts this time. It's not visible where it's underwater. I put on gloves when working with melamine sponge. Sometimes I do it without gloves. I wet the melamine sponge in clean water and wipe the places that I need to hide. For example, this bit, it goes away great with the melamine sponge. I also soften the sharp edges of the clouds. And I dab it with a clean tissue, right after using the sponge. I also want to soften the sharp line of the beach, make it smoother. We can remove masking fluid from the signature. I think our work is finished. Let's look at it critically in general. It's best to look at it from a distance. See what you need to add. Of course, we won't add any major things, but some accents are possible. So that's the work we've done. You can get down to your independent practice now. Post your works with the hashtag CNastyLessons. I look at every work and post it in my stories. I'm always happy to see you succeed. It inspires me, so leave your feedback and next time we'll paint stones underwater. See you soon!